So if Israel's strategic value, its loyalty to the US, and its moral decisions don't explain the enormous support that the US provides it, what does? Well, the argument with the strongest evidence is that the US's unyielding support of Israel is the result of a powerful and sophisticated Israel lobby that directly influences the government. Let's take the example we explored earlier, the Iraq War. I've already explained how partnering with Israel in the war on terror wasn't strategically beneficial to the United States. So why did our government go all in on the war on terror? The justification that the government gave us for invading Iraq was that they were acquiring weapons of mass destruction. But where do you think we got that bad information from? This conclusion was arrived at in no small part because of misleading Israeli intelligence reports. In hindsight, it was clear that Israel wanted us to invade Iraq for their own gain. After the invasion, the Senate Intelligence Committee and Israeli Knesset released separate reports revealing that much of the intelligence Israel gave to the Bush administration about WMDs in Iraq was false. In fact, before the invasion, when the issue was brought to the UN Security Council, Saddam Hussein agreed to allow UN inspectors into Iraq. Everyone seemed pleased with this transparency, except Israel. PM Ariel Sharon visited Moscow to tell Putin that it was too late for inspections to be effective. Foreign Minister Shimon Peres said, quote, "Dishonest people can overcome inspectors," and even became so frustrated by the unanimous agreement to have WMD inspections that he questioned France's status as a permanent member of the Security Council. An article in the foreword said, quote, "Saddam Hussein's surprise acceptance of unconditional United Nations weapons inspections put Israel on the hot seat this week for forcing it into the open as the only nation actively supporting the Bush administration's goal of Iraqi regime change." Former Prime Minister Ehud Barak said, quote, "Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons program provides the urgent need for his removal." Benjamin Netanyahu said that Saddam was, quote, "feverishly trying to acquire nuclear weapons." The member of the president's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board and executive director of the 9/11 Commission, Philip Zelikow, told a University of Virginia audience on September 10, 2002, that Saddam was not a direct threat to the United States. Quote, "The real threat is the threat against Israel. And the American government doesn't want to lean too hard on it rhetorically because it is not a popular sell." General Wesley Clark, the retired NATO commander and former presidential candidate, said in August 2002 that, quote, "Those who favor this attack now will tell you that Saddam Hussein is no threat to the United States, but they are afraid that at some point he might decide that if he had a nuclear weapon, to use it against Israel." In April of 2002, Benjamin Netanyahu told American journalists that Saddam was developing nuclear weapons that could be delivered against the American homeland in suitcases or satchels, and made multiple visits to Washington, D.C. to persuade us that war with Iraq was good. Israeli government spokesperson Rhiannon Gissen said, quote, "If Saddam Hussein is not stopped now, we will have to deal with an Iraq that is armed with nuclear weapons." Prime Ministers Shimon Peres and Ehud Barak argued the same thing. The pressure on Bush and the US to invade Iraq also came from within the US from the Israel lobby. White House official Douglas Feith had connections to the Zionist Organization of America and Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, where he was a member of the board. He even wrote articles defending Israel's domination over the occupied territories, which, as we discussed earlier, is a violation of the Geneva Conventions. The Jewish Council for Public Affairs and the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations voted to support the use of force in Iraq. Mortimer Zuckerman, the chairman of the Conference of Presidents, also happens to be the editor-in-chief of the US News and World Report. In it, he wrote, quote, "Those who predict dire results if we try to unseat Saddam simply refuse to understand, as President Bush manifestly does, that if we opt to live with a nightmare, it will only get worse. Much worse. The best medicine here, in other words, is preventative medicine." Journalist Nathan Gutman reported, quote, "So long as Israel supports the war, so too do the thousands of AIPAC lobbyists who convened in the American capital." AIPAC Executive Director Howard Kaur told the New York Sun that, quote, "Lobbying Congress to approve the use of force in Iraq was one of AIPAC's successes over the past year." In a New Yorker profile of AIPAC's policy director Stephen J. Rosen, yes, that's Stephen J. Rosen, Jeffrey Goldberg reported that, quote, "AIPAC lobbied Congress in favor of the Iraq war." In the fall of 2003, when the Bush administration was having difficulty convincing Senate Democrats to allocate more money for the war, Senate Republicans asked AIPAC to lobby their Democratic colleagues to support the funding request. AIPAC representatives talked to some of the Democratic senators, and the money was approved. The Project for the New American Century, a think tank started by Jewish Zionist billionaire Bill Kristol, organized a letter calling for regime change in Iraq in 1998. Many of the people who signed this letter, like Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Perley, and Elliott Abrams, went on to secure positions in the Bush administration. There is example after example of highly influential people in Washington who had ties to Israel and the Israel lobby pushing for the Iraq invasion. I could go on for hours, but the point is this. Saddam Hussein didn't have any nuclear weapons, a strong economy, a strong military, nor any connections to 9/11. We invaded Iraq and overthrew Saddam Hussein because Israel wanted us to. In fact, the Israel lobby is so powerful that they're careful not to make it too obvious. During a speech given in March 2006 about the danger of Iran, President Bush said, quote, "The threat from Iran is, of course, their stated objective to destroy our strong ally Israel. That's a threat, a serious threat. I made it clear, I'll make it clear again, that we will use our military might to protect our ally Israel." This instance, and many other instances of Bush being overly enthusiastic in his pro-Israel rhetoric, made the Israel lobby very nervous. The Forward reported, quote, "Jewish community leaders have urged the White House to refrain from publicly pledging to defend Israel against possible Iranian hostilities." This was even concerning to Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who told pro-Israel groups to slow down on the Israel propaganda because, quote, "We don't want it to be about Israel." To understand why the opinions of people in these positions matter on shaping policy, it's not only a matter of proximity influence, but also of financial influence. Winning an election means running an effective, expensive campaign, and candidates critical of Israel are cut off from a huge number of important donors. On the flip side, being staunchly pro-Israel can sometimes give a candidate the push they need to win an election. Take Harry Truman. During the 1948 presidential election, he was way behind in the polls, and with little time left until Election Day, Harry Truman met with Abraham Feinberg. Feinberg was a Zionist Jew who helped illegally smuggle arms into the Haganah, which eventually became the IDF after Israel was established, and used his vast wealth to support Zionist organizations his entire life. Feinberg promised Truman the campaign contributions he needed in exchange for US support in creating the State of Israel. Truman himself even said that, quote, "Jewish leaders in the United States were putting all sorts of pressure on me to commit American power and forces on behalf of the Jewish aspirations in Palestine." With Feinberg's money, Truman ran his historic Whistle Stop Tour campaign, which secured him the presidency. Today, Truman's victory in 1948 is considered the greatest election upset in American history. It should not surprise you then that 9 days before planning for this re-election campaign, President Harry Truman officially recognized the State of Israel without even consulting the US State Department. A decade later, John F. Kennedy's 1960 presidential campaign tells a similar story. JFK's entire family had a rocky relationship with Israel due to their controversial views on Jews and Adolf Hitler, but the time came when Kennedy needed money. He met with Abraham Feinberg and 20 other high-profile political financiers who grilled him about his views on Israel. The next day, JFK was furious, and he visited his close friend Charles Bartlett to blow off steam. Bartlett said, quote, "As an American citizen, he was outraged to have a Zionist group come to him and say, 'We know your campaign is in trouble, we're willing to pay for your bills if you'll let us have control of your Middle East policy.' Quote, 'They wanted control,' end quote," Kennedy said. Furious as he may have been, a presidential campaign doesn't pay for itself. After accepting Feinberg's money and winning the presidential election, Kennedy pardoned criminals who had smuggled military hardware to Israel and made appointments that Feinberg approved of, including Mike Feldman, who was given authorization to monitor all secret US State Department and White House cable traffic pertaining to the Middle East. As influential as the Israeli lobby is over presidential elections, its grip over Congress is really where its power is evident. In my video about political corruption, I mentioned that 90% of winners of congressional races are the candidates who receive the most money. But you could make the case that there is an even stronger predictive metric than fundraising amounts. It's Israeli support. According to the AIPAC Political Action Committee, in 2024, 98% of AIPAC-backed candidates won their general elections, and 80% of freshman Congress members were AIPAC endorsed in 2024. Put differently, for every 50 candidates that are AIPAC supported, 49 of them win. And for every 5 new members of Congress, people who are getting their big break in their career, 4 of them are AIPAC candidates. The consequences for opposing AIPAC are just as evident too. Of the 12 anti-Israel candidates that AIPAC targeted in 2024, 11 of them lost their elections, including big-name incumbents like Jamal Brown and Cori Bush. Journalist Michael Massing reported that a congressional staffer sympathetic to Israel told him, quote, "We can count on well over half the House, 250 to 300 members, to reflexively do whatever AIPAC wants." Similarly, Stephen Rosen, yes, again, that's Stephen Rosen, once put a random napkin on a table in front of a reporter and said, quote, "In 24 hours, we could have the signatures of 70 senators on this napkin." Congressman Thomas Massie claims that it's so pervasive that he's the only Republican who isn't owned by Israel.
And I have Republicans who come to me and say, "That's wrong what AIPAC is doing to you. Let me talk to my AIPAC person." By the way, everybody but me has an AIPAC person.
What makes this all even worse, however, is that Israel is able to do this without any obstacles in their way. While organizations that represent other countries like China or Japan have to register under FARA, many Israel organizations don't. This has the effect of hiding Israeli influence in the government to even curious people. I myself had no idea that Israel had any influence over our government when I made my video on lobbying 2 years ago, because when I checked the donation amounts for foreign countries, Israel wasn't on there. The previously referenced AIPAC PAC and UDP alone add up to over $100 million, which would be 4 times Japan, currently listed as the highest country for 2024.